and the complexity of the problem. As humans, we look at a massive problem and we want a simple answer. We want someone to point us at a single thing and say, that's the thing that's going to get us out of this trouble that we're in. And it's unfortunately just not the reality. What I really like about the basting mechanism is that because starting a company, especially a startup that's built on new tech, deep tech, and so on, it's not like buying a garage. It's not like, okay, cool, I put in this amount of money, you put in this amount of money, the capitalization, we split it according to how much capital we each put in. What we do at Urobo, as we shift over to these more sustainable materials, we're just trying to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes as we did with the fossil plastic. We plan and develop technologies to get as much value as we can from that bioplastics after people have actually used them.
Today's guest is Dr. Wessel Myburgh, co-founder and CEO of Urobo Biotech, a South African biotech startup tackling the end-of-life problem of bioplastics. Urobo is a Stellenbosch University spin-out, co-founded by Wessel Myburgh and Dominique Rocher. The company is commercializing technology that uses microbial enzymes to break down certain plastics, especially bioplastics, and potentially recycle them into valuable fuels and chemicals. Wessel's work sits at the intersection of microbiology, clean fuels, circular economy, and climate technology. His research background includes work on how yeasts and enzymes break down plant-based waste into new products, which now informs Urobo's approach to recovering value from used bioplastics. This episode is about more than plastic waste. It is about what happens when science becomes infrastructure, when waste becomes feedstock, and when African deep tech founders build solutions for systems that do not yet exist. Dr. Wessel Myburgh, welcome to From Scarcity to Scale.
Wessel, how are you?
Good. Yeah, I've been busy living the founder life. Happy to connect again. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now let's jump right into it. Tell me, I want to take from what you've just said now, living the founder's life. What's like being a founder? Most of the time you talk to people, everybody wants to be their own boss. But tell me, you've literally walked in those shoes for a long time now. What's like being a founder?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't been in those shoes for that long. We only celebrated the company's birthday, 3-year birthday, like earlier in June, I think. I definitely have come to realize that the founder life is very much mythicized, or it's made to be this incredible, because everyone just sees Silicon Valley, free matcha lattes and whatever, and all of that stuff. But I think the reality is definitely a little bit different. And being your own boss is also, you can be a very, like most of the time, you're a very hard boss on yourself. So it can be quite difficult to work for yourself. I think I'm one of my worst critics, and I think it's true for a lot of founders as well. It's quite tough working for yourself. It's definitely not as romantic as people, I think, make it out to be. But that's also part of it. I think I've kind of leaned into it, and it's good to be down in the ditches and kind of fighting it out all of the time. It builds a lot of grit. So it's definitely not for the faint-hearted, and I would say it's probably more leaning towards the semi-insane to kind of take this on and go for it. But you need crazy people to do crazy things.
Yep. Amazing. Sure. I like that phrase. It's not for the faint-hearted, it's for the semi-insane people. So tell me, you've mentioned that being hard on yourself, it's one of the difficulties that comes with being your own boss, and let's call it like that, to being a founder. But what's, because you said it's not easy. What makes it difficult?
I think what makes it difficult is especially if you're, I think a good example is like fundraising. If you're the CEO and a big part of your responsibility is the fundraising, you know, like 90% of the time is the feedback that you get. And every time you get out of a conversation like that, when you're very hard on yourself and very critical on yourself, most of the times it's, what did I do wrong? What did I say wrong? Did I not get the message across well enough? Did we not crunch the numbers well enough before we did the pitch? And all of those things, you immediately look in on yourself and you're like, the problem must be me for all of these people telling me no. I just think that's not necessarily true. There's so many reasons for not getting a yes from investors, be it you're out of mandate, they're further along in their funding cycle than what you need to get in at to show them the returns that they want to see. There's so many other reasons why that no could have come your way. But our first is to look at ourselves. And I think it's a good instinct to have, because it's kind of like continual improvement. Okay, where could have improved on that pitch or in that interaction? But I think that's an example of where we're as founders sometimes overly critical on ourselves. And as the founders, you're expected to kind of, and as part of the role, is to know everything about everything in the company, especially from a technical founder. So you're the lead on the technical side. You really need to understand the technology, but you're also in the lead of the fundraising, and you're also responsible for the operations. And so you've got all of these things, and the expectation on yourself, at least for me, is that you kind of need to be PhD level knowledgeable at all of these different things. And that is just not possible. That's just not possible. And I think in that expectation of having to be the smartest person in your team on everything makes you very critical on yourself.
That's a very good answer. Obviously, it also depends what you're doing. In your instance, we're going to get to talking about Urobo Biotech in a moment. You have emerged from Deeptech, and it's a biotech that you're building, very different to someone who's building hardware or to someone who's building purely some software as a service startup. From your experience, why do you hear no a lot? Is it a question of there isn't enough money? We like what you're doing, we like your team, etc., but we just don't have the money? Or is it a question of too early for us, or it's a question of maybe something else, right? Like it's not the sexiest things to invest in right now. Nowadays, most people tend to be investing in fintech, for instance, or in or software as a service, and you coming with a biotech type of solution. What has it been your experience? Do they give you feedback when they just say no, or is it just a hard no? Can you talk about that?
Yeah. I mean, honestly, most of the times you really don't get that much feedback from the investors, at least from my experience. Here and there, we've gotten feedback from investors giving us kind of a little bit of a glimpse into why we got to know. Coming from biotech and deep tech, the kind of reason that we've gotten the most is it's too early stage. There's still too big risk on the technical side for the investors to come in. I think the reasoning for getting all of those no's and getting, I think, that response on it's too early. I mean, I get it. I get it from the investor side. There's still a lot of things to work and or to figure out, and investors view scale up as a massive risk for, especially for biotech. And just because you can run a process or deliver a certain quality product and so on at a beta pilot level does not just correlate to a full scale process working efficiency, and there's still quite a bit of risk in scaling that up. So I get it from the investor side. I think where a problem is that there is this missing middle almost in the funding landscape. Grants just they can get you to a certain point, but they have their place and utility, and they're amazing. But there's this gap between what grant funding can allow you to do and like the bigger capital you can get for deploying a full scale facility. I've experienced, my experience is that there's this missing gap of getting you out of the lab, but not at commercial scale yet. And it's very difficult in deep tech to do that kind of middle step without sufficient capital coming in. And when VCs on this side are telling you it's too early, but you're too late stage for grants and it's not fundamental work anymore, and these grants typically don't provide enough capital for you to do the middle ground that you need to do, you're kind of stuck in this valley of death. And I think a lot of deep tech is getting lost in that space. That's the one thing. And then the other thing I think that founders need to remember is, yes, you're super passionate about your project and your product and your company, and you believe it's the best thing since sliced bread, and the whole mantra of if we build it, they will come. It's kind of like our product is so amazing, everyone. But if you look at it from an investor's perspective, not just your company as specifically, but they have a deal flow of huge magnitude coming through. The options at their disposal of where to put the money is, I think we as founders underestimate that. Just the sheer amount of options these investors have to decide on where to put the money. That just means it is very competitive to get in there. And if you have a slightly higher risk in your deal versus another one, but the potential returns are almost exactly the same, then the investor is going to go for the lower risk profile, and you kind of have to understand that. So, yeah, what I'm trying to say is that we believe that like it's just this best product. How can anyone not get on board with it? But you have to remember that everyone gunning for funding believes that about their project, and there's a lot of people pitching for investment that have the same exact belief as you.
100%. Sure, that's such a good way of putting it. And you are well traveled. You have had the opportunity to observe other ecosystems as well, and to kind of see how things work in Europe, for instance, or in the US. Do you feel it's the same experience that founders in your industry have in those spaces? Let's say in Europe, for instance, I had on the show previously another biotech founder who told me that, look, had we been building in Boston, for instance, or in Europe, we would have had a much different experience because of the sheer amount of multiplicity. There's so many biotech founders that are available, I mean investors that are there, as opposed to here, you probably have only one who's actively investing and everybody is running toward them. Hence your point that they are now exposed to so many options and with limited capital. Do you agree with that sentiment?
100%. Yeah, no, 100%. 100%. So, yeah, I think, and there's a lot to say about it. So, yeah, I mean, the ecosystems are fundamentally completely different. Completely different. Number one, I think in Europe they have a lot stronger kind of backing for this valley of death, because they actually have large grant programs that you can, as an SME, apply for and be part of a consortium and so on for. So like grants on that level, and it can be regional grants from specific regions in the Netherlands or in Italy or in Germany that have very big subsidized debt or just pure grants or repayable grants that can really help small companies. So I think they've done better at kind of trying to bridge that gap before these companies go to VCs for growth money. So I think that has helped them a lot. They have a lot of infrastructure as well in that, specifically in the deep tech and biotech. But something that I've also realized is that deep tech and biotech and founders in general, I would say, but in deep tech and biotech in Africa, one of the founders that I know that I really respect a lot is Wessel Myburgh from Urobo Biotech. Shout out Fleur. And he has the saying, in Africa, you have to learn how to make champagne on a beer budget. And that is exactly what we do. Which means that when an African biotech or deep tech founder gets on to stage at VivaTech or something like that, and you see them pitch, and it is really impressive on what they've done, you have to take that with the backdrop of they built that on a beer budget, and they're pitching to people that's used to campaign. So mad respect to deep tech and biotech founders in Africa that are actually building it here, because there's no question in my mind that it comes with a different set of challenges compared to the European and the US situation. So, but it also builds a lot of resilience, I think, in our ecosystem, because you have to be gritty. You have to have those traits for you to survive 3, 4, 5 years and actually get tech out, because you know that the support is more limited than in Europe and so on. So yeah.
100%.
Yeah, no, it's a different
That's
ball game.
that's brilliant. Sure. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack here. I did want to ask, of course, from your experience with investors, a lot of times we get things like investors. We tell founders not to try and build as if they were building in Silicon Valley while they're building in Africa,
Mm,
because scarcity changes the rules, right? But from an investment point of view as well, I feel as though some great startups, as you've mentioned, tend to be overlooked by investors on the continent because
mm,
they're looking at them with a lens, a Silicon Valley lens, the traction and maybe the what we're talking about growth stage or where you are too early, etc. But is it really too early in the context where we find ourselves in? If you've been able to achieve certain things, do you feel like there's also an issue about how investors look at startups? Maybe there's some, as you've mentioned, some things that should have been considered, for instance, as in what we have been able to do now, like making champagne on a beer budget. At this stage, it's worth actually should count as a bonus. We shouldn't just
mm.
compare you on the same level as someone who's building a venture. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, no, I agree. I would love to have that investors kind of realize like what we've done on the budget that we've done it is absolutely incredible. Imagine what we can do with actual European money or US money. But that's just not how investors view it. And something that I think is still there. I mean, it's not necessarily directly, but I still think there's prejudice, especially in the deep tech and biotech sphere of building deep tech and biotech in Africa. I mean, we see it in the academic world as well, that when you're reporting these findings and these inventions and so on, people kind of just have this, how could they have done this in Africa? Kind of feeling, vibe thing of where there's still this pressures of like, how can they do these incredible things in Africa? And there's a bit of a mistrust there. So I think there's kind of that underlying things as well that's in it. And I think it really depends on the company. So for us at Urobo, we're very much solving a problem that's currently in the global north. What we do at Urobo is essentially we're making sure that as we shift to these new, more sustainable types of plastics, these new group of plastics, I mean, they're not that new anymore, but they're called bioplastics. And as we shift over to these more sustainable materials, we're just trying to make sure that we don't make the same mistakes as we did with the fossil plastic, and that we plan and develop technologies to get as much value as we can from that bioplastics after people have actually used them. So we're developing essentially a portfolio of different technologies, but our flagship at this stage is a enzymatic microbial process where we take bioplastics, we break them down, and we convert them to higher value products like chemical products or green energy like biogas and so on. So essentially, we're a biological recycling company that uses nature's own little catalysts to break down plastics and get more value out of them. In a nutshell, that's what we do.
And there aren't many people doing that on the continent at the moment, right? So if I'm not mistaken, you're not the only ones doing it. Are the other players doing the same thing?
I'm not sure about in Africa. I haven't picked up any other competing or other companies doing microbial conversion of plastics in Africa. I know there's a couple of academic research groups that have looked into it. I don't know of any other companies globally. Yeah, there's quite a few companies that are working on it, but it's still very fresh in Africa. I think there's only a couple of company or research groups that I've seen started looking into this. So yeah, there might be more. I might have missed a couple, but at the moment I'm not aware of any other African companies working on it. But yeah, so we're solving quite a global north problem, and for us that means that we have to align with a lot of the funding and so on, and the ecosystem of Europe, and because those are investors and entities that our customers are over there, all of that. For us, speaking to European investors and so on, it's a much more of a European conversation, if I can put it like that. Like we want to fit into their context. But I know that for a lot of other for other African startups that are really solving for Africa, there is this problem of a misunderstanding of the context. They just don't, like investors just don't understand the context of that company and the problem that they're solving, because they don't even know a lot of the times that the problem exists because they didn't live it. And I think there is a big disconnect in speaking to overseas investors as an African founder. There's a hurdle to overcome to just explain the problem to an investor if they don't truly understand it and live it. We've kind of had the opposite of it. When we speak to African investors, we struggle to explain the problem to them because they haven't lived the bioplastics problem. But when we speak to European investors, they immediately go, oh, yeah, we're quite aware of this because they've actually worked with a lot of bioplastics. They see bioplastics in their everyday life. So it's been easier for us speaking to European investors because they live the problem versus speaking to African investors because they haven't lived the problem. And I think vice versa, there's a clear disconnect there. And I think that also that within that disconnect, obviously there's a misunderstanding of the traction and there's a misunderstanding of the impact that's already been generated from the company's work and so on. So yeah, I think you need to, as the founder, if you're raising offshore, then you need to be sure that you understand that this gap exists between your context and the investor's context, and you have to really make sure that you bridge that gap. And from investors looking into Africa, they need to understand that it's not Silicon Valley in a different continent. It's fundamentally different. And I've seen it the differences that I've seen in African founders versus European founders and versus US founders, and the way that they, for instance, speak about the problems that they're solving, and even fundamentally the problems that they are solving. Right before we got on the call, I mentioned to you that one of the stark differences that I've seen, and I think we're a bit of an exception here, is that African founders really solve a fundamental problem, a problem that people are living. Like, it is not a nice to have, it's not a feature, it's not a tool, it solves something on the ground, and most of the time impacts people's lives massively. And I think that is amazing. It's amazing because I always go away from, like, a, let's say, a cohort that we did a accelerator program where African founders go over to Europe, and I've done a couple of those, and it's like it is so, like, encouraging, and it kind of makes me so proud and so, just super excited and motivated to see the African founders pitch there. And then there's like a European founder pitching this very nuanced problem, and that really typical first world problems. And these African founders are just like, we're giving people water that didn't have water previously, and we're doing it with this really cool new river water pump that we've built, and we built it with like zero money, no capital backing. We just did it on our own. And what's amazing with that as well is, like, African founders don't wait for other people's permission or approval to go out and solve that problem. They're like, nah, I'm going to get like 25-liter plastic drums. I'm going to build this thing myself in my backyard. I'm going to see how it works and iterate from there. They don't wait for other people's approval to say, oh, yeah, this is an amazing idea. They're really just like, this is the problem. How do we solve it? And that's a massive difference between the founders that I've seen.
Agreed. No, wow, that's very encouraging to hear that. You were recently at Deeptech, so I'm sure you're speaking also from that experience, like being an African founder, being thrown into in an ecosystem where like all the best of Europe are there, and you are also shining there. And it's not, from what I'm hearing, it's not like you're not there as second tier. You're at the same level, if not better, than some people who are working with better resources than, or let's say more resources that you actually have. So then that begs the question. It makes me think: is it a question of grit, the mindset, the tenacity, the resourcefulness of these African founders? Is it a matter of this storytelling behind it that is not presented to the right investors? Because when we started the conversation, there was a mention of there's a certain what you call prejudice towards African founders because of what people think about the continent and what it means to build on the continent. And then when they get the experience to see an African founder doing something really out of the box, they're like, how can you build something so cool from Africa? People are kind of like taken aback. Then the question is, it's just a question of their stories are not being told enough or at all, or is there another issue? Because at least if their story was being told and the right investors could see that this isn't just another Silicon Valley, it's a whole new ground altogether, and there's great potential for return on investment. But why they're not running here then to come and invest?
Hmm. I'm not sure, Daniel, honestly. I mean, I think that investors are attracted to shiny things, kind of thing. They kind of like to see flashy new AI, this thing that's it's so complicated. I can't even explain it to you. Sorry. It's so amazing technology, and we're doing all of these fancy super things because they have all of these resources to these super fancy things and so on. And I think investors like that. All European and US investors kind of like the flashy things. And somewhere along the line, I think it's maybe just a mandate difference. They have a mandate to kind of build AI infrastructure at the moment is a big thing, and solving fundamental problems on the African continent is just not part of that mandate. So I'm not 100% sure, but I think that kind of, yeah, prejudice thing is also kind of related to that. Maybe the solutions coming out of Africa, as amazing as they are and as technical as they are and so on, isn't necessarily the flashiest things as coming out of Silicon Valley and all of that stuff. And then the other big thing is that, you know, a lot of those startups in Europe building these really kind of fancy solutions and so on, they have big names behind them. They've piloted with massive companies with a lot of weight and a lot of kind of oomph behind them, versus for African founders, it's make those connections and run pilots with those very large multinationals and do those types of things for a myriad of other reasons. And I think when you have easy access to those entities and those companies and so on, and or easier access to those entities and companies, and you can run a quick pilot with Bayer or a quick pilot with BASF and things like that, investors note that, and as they should, because working with those companies does come with a lot of backing behind that. The fact of the matter is that doing those types of collaborations and so on from an African context is a lot more difficult. And what ends up happening is, I think you end up going to a same VC. Your tech might be just as good as a European company and so on, but on their pitch deck they have company XYZ that they've partnered with, done collaborations with, and everything. And it kind of just puts a massive stamp of global approval on this tech versus you coming as a standalone small entity, not having that. I would actually make an analogy here. Something that I say about the plastic pollution crisis, which is obviously where we're addressing a part of that, and then that's where our kind of mission started. But I get asked often and told often, like, okay, so what you're saying is essentially like, we give enough money to Urobo, you develop the tech, you're going to solve the plastic problem. Is that like that? I'm like, no, you're misunderstanding like the problem. First of all, the size of the problem and the complexity of the problem. As humans, we look at a massive problem and we want a simple answer. We want someone to point us at a single thing and say, that's the thing that's going to get us out of this trouble that we're in. And it's unfortunately just not the reality. Massively complex problems need not necessarily a massively complex solution, but it needs multiple facets to be addressed fully. And wanting a simple solution for a very complex issue is just not necessarily the answer that we should be looking for. And I think it's the same with this. There's, I think, so many things at play as to why there's these stark differences between founders building in Africa and founders building in Europe and founders building in America, that it's difficult to point to a single thing. And I think the reasons differ by situation to situation, who you're talking to, what type of deal you're talking about? Is it a collaboration that you're talking about? Is it investment that you're talking about? Is it just opportunities? Is it just, I think each of those have different reasons as to why they play out the way that they do.
That's very good. We've spoken a lot about investment and investing in Africa. I want to shift gears now and zoom in on the founder himself. Perhaps to be fair, let's talk particularly about deep tech founders and biotech founders, because that's a whole beast in its own league. Building a tech startup is already difficult, but building it in biotech, that's another problem altogether. So let's talk a little about your journey, right? From what I've seen so far, most founders that I've interviewed in the biotech space have emerged out of deep tech, out of university, and it was either research or something came from university and then grew into this commercializable project. Can you walk us a little bit through how did you go from being a scientist to now running a successful biotech startup?
Yeah, I think the reason why most of the African deep tech and biotech, most, not all, but African deep tech and biotech is coming from universities because that is where a lot of resources to do the fundamental work is. And you need that fundamental work to kind of get the innovation to a point where it can be commercialized. Yeah, I mean, my journey, I was straight up academic and 10 years at Stellenbosch University, did my honors, my master's and my PhD all the way through at Stellenbosch University and the University of Padova later on in my PhD, and essentially developed the technology that we started Urobo off of. I think it adds another layer on top of being a founder is what I would firstly put out there, is that it does add another layer of complexity to the founder role that you have to fulfill after you've kind of made this initial invention and you license it from the university. But I think it's been it's been very good. It's been very good working with Stellenbosch University and with them having the experience of kind of commercializing these technologies with spin-out companies, them having the experience of doing that before has kind of helped us to set out a roadmap. Personally, it's been a very interesting and I would say difficult journey to be on, to move from a very deep scientific mindset to a business mindset is very difficult. We speak different languages, to be quite honest. It's a completely different language to that you speak. And it's been difficult to also keep the balance because the fact of the matter is that we're still building a lot of the technology and there's still a lot of technical language that's required in our day to day. You can't just go immediately all the way to the other end. Especially if you're still involved in the technical side, you have to keep some of that technical kind of fundamentals going because you're still involved in the technical side. And the multitude of hats that you're having to wear in the different situations can honestly become quite overwhelming, I think, for a lot of academic founders, technical founders that shift over into a more business role. I think it's in that same breath, it's really important to get a team together and get advisors together because know your limitations. And I've always said I want to be in a position where I know that I'm not the smartest person around the table when we're having a meeting. I want to feel stupid when we're having technical discussions because I want the technical team to be way better at it than what I am. And the same is on the business side. I want to go into my board meetings and have my board really give input and give solid advice about strategy moving forward and give solid feedback on the way that I've been handling the strategy to this point. So point is that I think it's really important as a technical founder coming out of university in deep tech still is to really try and surround yourself with people that you can learn from and that you trust and that would make you feel stupid sitting around the table. I think that's a good thing.
Sure, that's a very good point. Team, this is usually an important thing that keeps coming up every time I have this engagement with founders. You are a co-founder, so I want you to talk to me about, is it is it important to have a co-founder? Because it's one thing to have a team of experts work under you. It's important to have a co-founder on just not just having the team, but having a co-founder. Is it important, or is it just something that happened organically? It's like, oh, it happened, or is it something that you would recommend for anybody kind of following in your footsteps, wanting to build a biotech? Let's stay in the biotech lane.
Yeah, my opinion is that it's very important. I think it's very important to have someone from the start with skin in the game. I think that's something really important. And I think it's important because it's a tough journey. It is a very tough journey. And the team is amazing and all of that. But the founders are the ones where it's really kind of, I want to say, raw, open heart conversations that you can have, where you can honestly go and sit down with that with your founding team and be like, guys, I'm at a loss here. I don't know, we don't know what we're going to do. Versus for, let's say, your team, you kind of don't want to project that. And having a core team, i.e. the founders, where you can really be raw, and it is completely raw, and that those people are in it as much as you are in it. I think you need that space within the company and as the founder as well. It's lonely as it is having co-founders. It's lonely as it is, but having that kind of like deep place of where you can fall back to and be like, have the very hard conversations about the company and how things are going and where you're going, I think is really important. And you need that foundation of people that are in it for the long haul. And I think that security of having that in the founding team is really important. But as it's really important with the team that you're picking and who you decide to go forward with, even more important on the founding team who you decide to move forward with. I would really advise anyone that's thinking about starting a company and so on, is it's one of the most important decisions you can make in a company is who do you bring along for this long haul. Like, who is that person or persons that you can be absolutely raw with, and they won't kind of sugarcoat things for you, and you can be completely open to them. Your mission is aligned, your ethics is aligned, your work ethics is aligned. That is one of the most important kind of decisions that you can make early on in establishing the company. So don't take it lightly.
100%.
But
Sure.
I think you also have to put trust in people. You have to put trust in your founding team. So
Yeah.
if you don't want to go it alone, then you have to put that trust in people. And at some point you have to kind of take the leap and just go and do it.
Do you think it's an ego thing that a founder would think, I want to have the whole pie to myself? I don't want to share it with anybody, because I mean, having a co-founder meaning that you're sharing the pie, they have shares, their stakes in it. Is it an ego thing that I can do this myself? I don't need to share it with anybody. So that's the first question I wanted to ask you. The other question is, somebody made an analogy between finding a co-founder to finding a life partner. They said it's very similar. So I don't know what your sentiments are on those things. If that's were the case, then what are the traits that because obviously everybody has preferences in terms of who they want as life partners. You've mentioned that, okay, you want somebody who can be super critical with you and somebody with whom you can be vulnerable. But what are some of like the good traits that one should be looking for in a co-founder?
Yeah. On the ego thing, I think it can very, very quickly become an ego thing. Yes, 100% sure. I would very much tell people, put your ego aside. Like, put your ego aside when you're having those discussions. And there's ways of kind of protecting yourself from people's egos. If PT says he thinks that he's going to contribute 75% of the company's worth in over time, and therefore you can say, okay, that's fine, but we're going to vest that. So you need to prove that you're bringing that value in, and then you can get that equity stake. That's fine. So, but I would definitely say,
Can you quickly explain vesting for someone who doesn't know what that means?
Essentially a allocation of the shareholding, but you don't get the shareholding from day one. There are certain milestones, KPIs, or other cliffs that you need to hit for you to get the option to that shareholding. So it is allocated to you, but it's an option pool, essentially. Very similar to an ESOP, but it's just for the founders, and there are specific milestones that then trigger that shareholding for that founder. So if you are the technical founder, and you can set very technical milestones or triggers for that, and once the technical founder can show that the company has reached those technical milestones, then the shareholding triggers. It's just a way of
It's a ring fence.
protecting
You're putting
everyone.
around yourself as
Exactly.
well. Yeah, 100%. Because then, yeah, I give you the shares, and then it's committed, and like 2 months later, you're like, I'm out of here, but you still have the shares. And obviously, then you start carrying the whole load by yourself, basically.
Yeah. No, 100%. And what I really like about the vesting mechanism is that because starting a company, especially a startup that's built on new tech, deep tech, and so on, it's not like buying a garage. There's not like, okay, cool, I put in this amount of money, you put in this amount of money, the capitalization, we split it according to how much capital we each put in. There's a lot of building that needs to happen in a startup, and the shareholding needs to reflect on who's going to build that, in my opinion. And a vesting schedule essentially allows you to say, if you build it, you get it. And I think that's a really good way of doing it. So you can protect the company and yourself and the founders, the whole founding team, by kind of putting a vesting schedule in, or protect them from their own egos, essentially, by putting a vesting schedule in, I think. So then the other one, the life partner versus founder, VCs always love to say, this is like a marriage. And you have to think about it like a marriage when you get investment from a VC. And there's a reason why they do that. And I think very similar for founders. I think it just indicates the magnitude of the decision that you're making. And I do agree with that. And just like in choosing a life partner, different partners fit different people. It's not like the ideal founder for me is the same traits that someone else would look for, because in my opinion, you want complementarity. You want people that complement each other, and not just have this choir all singing the same thing. And for that, I like to have a person that challenges me. So I don't want my founding group everyone just agree on everything that everyone says. I want there to be pushback. I want there to be discussion and varying opinions on that. So for me, traits of like someone that is outspoken, that is confident enough to raise issues and not just keep quiet when something's bothering them or when they don't agree. That's something that's really important to me. It's like, you see something in the company that's not going well, speak up, mention. You say, Wessel, I'm seeing something happening here in my group of people or in my sphere that we need to talk about. That's really important. And so I think that that confidence is really important in having in your co-founder, that you can trust them to speak up, especially when. And you should see your founding group also as guardrails on yourself. I want people to tell me, Wessel, you're making this, like, in my opinion, you're taking us down the wrong road here. So we can talk about it, discuss it, and kind of together get to a better position. Otherwise, it's just everyone just piles down this one route that the one founder suggested or whatever. So I think that's really important. A really big one is resilience. You have to be mentally like really tough to kind of go on the long road for this. And I mean, we've only been doing this for 3-4 years, and I've experienced really how much it takes from you. The other thing is that there has to be massive commitment and conviction. There has to be a massive commitment and conviction. You don't want there to be a misalignment between your commitment and your conviction and your co-founder's commitment and conviction. It's going to cause friction later on. And then I also believe that core values need to be there, especially around the company's mission. If for Urobo, you don't have a founder that's somewhere deep down fundamentally thing driving them is to change the way that we handle our waste, it's going to fundamentally be a problem in the founding team. And so I think that those core values and the why of doing it needs to be quite well aligned between the founding groups.
Amazing. Wessel, we've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about investing in Africa. We've talked about building from scarcity into scale. What did we not talk about that is important that we should have done?
Something quite close to my heart is founder well-being. I think it's something that's very much overlooked, and it's something that I am trying to learn myself. And the realization of you are the end, and this doesn't say anything about the team or anything. We've got an incredible team, and we would not have been able to do anything without our team. The people in the labs doing the work, that is 100% there. But as the founder or the CEO or one of the co-founders, you are the engine. You're the engine keeping this thing just plugging along. If you run out of steam, the engine comes to a stop. That is how it is. You're also the thing, the entity setting the culture of the company. And you have to always keep that in mind. If you are setting a culture of burnout, then that is the culture that you're building. And if instead you're setting a culture of well-being, then that is the culture that you're building inside of the company. And I think that a lot of the times in founder circles, it's kind of like this, ooh, this is how hard I'm working. Like, this is how hard I'm working. That's the name of the game. That's the baseline. And it's not a competition, but there's this, and I think within yourself as well, it's like, especially like for me personally, it's been like, no, you need to work more, you need to work harder, you need to spend more time. Like, who needs a weekend? That's you just keep going like that. And at some point you run out of steam. I really advocate for really taking some time. You need to look after yourself. Otherwise, the engine is going to run out, or you're going to build a culture that is not aligned with what you want to build. And I think it gets looked over a lot and actually pushed to the side, because there's this part of the startup culture and founder culture is hustle. You have to hustle and you have to be super busy all of this time. And yes, that is very true, and you have to do those things. But damn, you kind of need to look after yourself as well, and spend some time in nature and do some other things as well. I think what it helps to do as also is that it just reinforces a little bit that you are also something outside of the company that you're building. You're also something outside of this founder role that you fulfill. It takes so much time out of your life being a founder that I think it can become your whole identity and everything that you're about. But we are more than that. We're also humans, and humans that have families and that have other interests outside of the company and so on. And those things are important for you to be a whole human in order to function optimally in a founder role. So I would say that every now and again, just take a step back and prioritize yourself as well a little bit. If the world doesn't end when you don't work on a Sunday, then take the Sunday off.
Wow, that is so profound. Thank you so much for dropping that. That has blessed me. Like, just to hear that. And you're right. We live in a hustle culture where we glorify statements like, I haven't slept in 4 days. And people kind of look at you as like, no, that's a hard working person right there, not taking distractions. But like you said, you run out of steam real quick, and you become even more irritable and become just less pleasant to be around, and you find that you make more mistakes. In the end, it's going to jeopardize the whole operations and and being in an investment space now, I mean, I've heard stories of how mental decline for founders because of the pressure of the money received from investors now, and I did not spend it well. So what do I do? And the actions that people take sometimes, it's a serious problem. And I'm glad you raised it. And I'm hoping that a lot more people are going to take that seriously and just prioritize their well-being, mental well-being, physical well-being, everything. Your family, personal time, very important. So thank you so much for making the time to share all this insight about the African ecosystem, dropping those golden nuggets to help other founders not make mistakes that most people make. But also, I'm hoping that as investors are watching this, it's kind of giving them a different insight, a different perspective into the mind of a founder. And hopefully that's going to help them change how they do investing in Africa. Any last words from you, advice, anything?
No, thanks for having me, Daniel, man. I really appreciate it. And I think it's great that what you're doing. And I really believe that I've got this kind of mindset where we say built in Africa for the world. And I really believe that can be a reality. I've seen a lot of African founders pitch on global levels, and 99% of the time I come back and I say, guys, we don't have to stand back for anyone. Honestly, we can become a massive player in this field. So I would really encourage African founders to don't wait for anyone to give you approval to do the thing that you think you need to do. Go out and do it. I think that we can show a lot of people what can be done in Africa and how we can get that out and take it to the world.
100%. Built in Africa and for the world. First, on that note, I thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Daniel.